What advice would you give anyone who was interested in becoming an English language teacher?
Well, the very obvious advice is to make sure you get qualified, get a qualification. And it's what we call initial certification. There are plenty of ways to get fairly cheap, quick online certification that don't actually mean much, because a lot of these online courses that exist, they aren't really seen as being valid qualifications, either on the kind of regulatory systems like we have in the UK, or in terms of by the language schools themselves. In order for that certification to mean something, it's usually got to involve what we call teaching practice, and that is simply an opportunity for you as a trainee teacher to teach a group of learners and to have that, and then to get feedback on your teaching, often as part of the assessment process of the course itself. So the kind of courses that do that include the Trinity CertTESOL and also the Cambridge CELTA, and these courses allow trainee teachers to do both of them. In fact, allow them to do 6 hours of assessed teaching practice, where they're actually practicing teaching, getting feedback on their teaching by a support tutor, and working in a community with other trainee teachers where they're experimenting with language teaching together, and they're also learning a lot about language teaching. So my simple advice is to get the certification before you start, because irrespective of whether your English is your first language or it's an additional language for you, the ability to teach a language isn't as simple as the ability to use it or to speak it.
Thanks. And you mentioned teaching practice, and I know that a lot of courses get trainee teachers to teach to each other, often like peer teaching, sometimes they call it micro teaching. Yeah. How does this compare, do you think, to teaching actual students in an actual language?
It can help. It's obviously a very different thing, because often we are not very good actors naturally. The vast majority of us aren't. And so when you kind of get trainee teachers to pretend to be students, often the way that they behave won't really replicate what students will do in the classroom environment, and therefore the challenges they present will be different. But there are some advantages, because some parts of teaching, just like anything that we any process that we do, that we have to proceduralize, we turn into a procedure, has to be practiced. So things like giving instructions, things like using simple English when you're communicating with English language learners, these are things that we need to practice and practice and practice so that we can do them almost automatically, which enables us, when we're teaching, to focus on the more challenging parts of the process. So micro-teaching, irrespective of whether you do it with colleagues or in just short bursts with students, as it's understood in mainstream teaching, is a very useful way of providing that kind of opportunity to proceduralize the practice. But in terms of replicating the classroom environment, many people say that it doesn't really replicate it very well at all.
So ideally a good initial teacher education course would be one which gives you some maybe micro-teaching practice with peers to proceduralize some things, but perhaps importantly actually gives you that classroom experience with real students, so that you know what you're doing when you actually go out into the real world and start teaching.
Absolutely. So a course like the Trinity CertTESOL requires course providers to recruit real students. Often they get the students, give the lessons to students for free, so that puts the trainees under less pressure. But they will actually recruit real students who are really learning the language, and that provides both the authenticity of the students' needs, that is an important part of that, and it also provides with the unpredictability that students will always have when compared to, say, micro-teaching colleagues.
Okay, thank you.